And I'm happy to talk about abortion because you said that you're pro-life, and I respect anybody's opinion on this. I don't think anybody should tell a woman what to do with her body. That's my personal opinion, so we might disagree a little bit. Do you think there should be exceptions? I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this? Because Donald Trump said if there was a bill put on his desk for an abortion ban, he didn't say he would veto that bill. And I think there's some women that might disagree with you, which is okay, but they're worried, they're scared. What would you say to them?
I would tell them to not be scared, to not believe the dangerous and baseless rhetoric that is coming from Kamala Harris and the Democrats, because that's not at all what's going to happen. He has stated multiple times, even throughout the debate, that this is a state by state issue. So every state is making the decisions necessary. They're, implementing amendments, they're voting on amendments, and residents in each state are going to make the final call and the decision on how many limits they want to place on abortion, from what time and date specifically they want to do that. But that's not something that's going to happen at the federal level. That's something that he refuses to do, and that he reiterates that he stands by the decision by the Supreme Court. And I think that that's important because it's going to allow California to make the decisions that they want to do, and it's going to allow Texas to make the decisions that they want to do, and every state is different. And at the end of the day, it all resides in the voters and what voters want.
So they just implemented, to correct me if I'm wrong, in Arizona, a 6-week ban. The state, people in the state didn't vote on that. And there were some, you saw what happened in Alabama. Are you okay with Supreme Court justices and states making the decision rather than the people making the decision? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there's a clear collaboration. That's why we have a constitutional republic as well. It's something that it has to be done state by state. Every state has the decision to be able to regulate and make laws or pass laws regarding this as they deem fit.
Okay, fair enough. So you're a conservative, you're a Republican. Why is it you think that Republicans in presidential elections struggle to get 15% of the black vote? They don't get the minority vote that Democrats get. Why do you think that is? And do you feel like the Republican Party needs to change some things in what they're doing? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely not. What we're seeing in the polls is that actually we're gaining ground with both Black and Hispanic voters at a level not seen at least in the last 4 presidential cycles. If anything, Kamala Harris should be concerned because she's the first Democrat to not poll within the same at least numbers that is typically seen or associated with the Democrat Party, and that we're seeing these minority groups no longer identifying with Democrats because they've made so many promises for them throughout the years that they just haven't fulfilled or haven't followed through with, because they only talk about and care about them when election season passes around. But then once they get elected, they completely forget about them. It's like using a toy at your disposal and then getting rid of them when they're no longer fitting your needs. And unfortunately, that's how it's always been. However, what we are seeing is that we have a lot more Latinos and African Americans that are showing, it's not the typical arguments that Democrats are always touting that they care about anymore. Actually, they care about the economy. The inflation is their number one concern. This is across all demographics. It doesn't matter, what background or race you have or come from. It's the fact of the matter is that everybody is suffering under the current policies with this administration.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about inflation for a moment. So, as you know, we're under 3% inflation, and compared to every G7 country, we are number one with the lowest inflation, under 3%. Do you give Joe Biden any credit for that, or do you blame him for inflation across the world?
I blame him as well for inflation that's affecting our country. Just like I blame Kamala Harris because the Democrats have passed policies that have increased the amount of government spending that ultimately affects inflation and ultimately affects the cost of living. That is a fact. The Inflation Reduction Act did absolutely nothing to reduce inflation. It actually worsened it. And economists have predicted that for the next 10 years, it is going to be worsening not only inflation, but our deficit as well. So that's a fact. Government spending is contributing and worsening inflation.
No, I understand that point that you're making. My only point is we're doing better than all those other G7 countries. Would you admit that that's at least a good thing, or that's not a good thing?
Depends on how you want to see it. Do you want to see it as the fact that we're close enough to countries that are typically underneath us as a good thing? Or do you want to see it as, we've done better before? Why are we not doing better at this moment in time?
Well, I would say
almost 4 years after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I would say that has a lot to do with it. I think you would agree with me. Ukraine, the war in the Ukraine and Israel, but you do care. You care about spending, right? And reckless spending, which I think is very, very fair. What would you say to people out there that would say, well, wait a second, Donald Trump got us $8.2 trillion in debt? What would you say to those people?
Well, the fact that you just mentioned the fact that we were struggling because of the COVID pandemic and using
Sure.
as an excuse the Ukraine war, you should probably also realize that yes, he had to do a lot more of the spending right as the COVID-19 pandemic was impacting this country. He had to do something to keep citizens afloat while Democrats in their Democrat states and cities were implementing lockdowns with an indefinite expiration date, sacrificing families, sacrificing their jobs, sacrificing children's education, and worsening in many instances children's education in these very same Democrat states and cities. We
Weren't there
have
Republican
kids that are
governors that shut
struggling
down?
with reading comprehension skills, they're struggling with math skills. Why is that? It's not because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was barely trying to keep people afloat while the Democrats were continuing with these lockdown policies that damaged this
Weren't
country.
there correct me if I'm wrong, Vianca, but weren't there Republican governors as well that locked down their states? You're making it sound like it was only Democrats, and I thought it was left to the states, and there were plenty of Republicans that locked down their states as well. Were they not? Am I
It
wrong?
was temporary. The Republicans that did it temporarily. We have
Right. So
Democrats
did the
that were still touting. Even Joe Biden wanted to implement a federal lockdown, and he wanted to also implement a federal requirement for vaccines. And those that didn't get vaccinated were going to lose their jobs. So much for the working class party being the Democrats. Am I right?
Well, I mean, unemployment is the lowest it's been in 50 years. Would you dispute that?
Yes, that's actually false. The
Why is that
unemployment rate
false?
was actually lower under Donald Trump's term than it is currently.
That's where are you getting that stat from? That's with all due respect, that's not true. The unemployment rate was lower, and it's lower now than it was before COVID struck. We've had the lowest unemployment rates that we've had in 5 decades. I'm wondering where you're getting your numbers from, if you could help me out with that.
I'm getting my numbers from official government sources, and I do know that, for example, for Latino Americans in this country, the unemployment was the lowest that it had ever been under Donald Trump's administration